This podcast is brought to you by Mad Company, a nonprofit theater company based out of New York City.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Hale of a Conversation. My name is James Hale. I am your host for this podcast. With me today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Gerrard James, actor and creative extraordinaire. Gerrard, how are we doing?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here, man.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
We tried to schedule this 4 or 5 different times, but you're just so damn busy.
Oh, goodness.
That we can't get a hold of you. So we know each other from Lambda. We
Yep.
were on the MA course there. We also lived together through the pandemic, which was an eye-opening experience for everyone. You are a New York guy. Before that, I wonder if you can just sort of quickly sketch your journey from maybe budding artist or interest in the arts to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, I started off in, outside of the arts completely.
Mm-hmm.
So before I moved to New York in 2009, I was working as a trade capture analyst at JP Morgan. I did some classes. I did a class at Morehouse in undergrad for acting with a teacher named Crystal Dickinson, who is in the show Covenant right now. Still mentor and friend of mine. But that's when I kind of realized, I really want to do this. But I think I just felt a lot of pressure to uphold this idea that I needed to kind of carry the torch forward. You know, my parents worked really hard to get to where they were financially. They're both from the projects of Atlanta. And I kind of felt this responsibility to say, all right, I got to carry it forward. I have to either be a doctor, which wasn't going to happen, or a lawyer, which I did think about. But finance was something that really interested me because my dad, when I was in high school, he got laid off from a merger. And I was so interested in how that could upset jobs, but how could you create more jobs, and was interested in M&A, which is mergers and acquisition. And I was just like, all right, maybe I need to go to school for finance. And I went to Tufts University first in Medford, which is pretty much Boston. It is different, but Medford, Massachusetts, and realized very quickly that I wanted to be at a school that was, I wanted to be where my brother was in Atlanta. I wanted to be near my family. Tufts was very much like the high school that I went to in Connecticut, and where I was a drop in the ocean as far as in being a person of color. And so I wanted to go to an HBCU, historically black college. And so I went to Morehouse. That's when I started taking acting classes, or I took that acting class with Crystal. It opened up my eyes, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll double major. And because I transferred from Tufts, double majoring would have meant I would have done 5 years of college. It would have added time, and then I felt bad because my parents were covering my college education, thankfully, with the small scholarship that I had. And so I kind of just put it on the back burner.
Sure.
And it wasn't until the stock market crashed in 2008
Yeah, I remember
that I realized, I'm going to work, and there are whole groups of people that are no longer in the building.
Wow.
And so there was a level of anxiety and fear. The whole entire accounting department was asked to pack up their stuff and transfer to another location, or they were out of a job. And I knew there was a woman who I was friends with, who was telling me all about her daughter's kindergarten. Her and her husband just planted roots in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is where I worked. And her daughter was going to school. And then all of a sudden, it was just boom, she had to leave. Wow. And I just remember it being a very anxious, a very hectic time. I think this is also when the protests started happening in 2009, on Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street.
Sure.
All of that was going on. And I realized how unhappy I was. But there was this thought in the back of my head where I was just I want to be an actor. I want to be an actor. I want to be an actor. And it started to get louder and louder and louder the more we lost clients at JP Morgan. So I had 4 hours free throughout my 8 to 9 hour day. And I just started, we had these 2 monitors, and I always had my Bloomberg terminal monitor up. And then on the other monitor, I would be reading things about acting, or reading interviews, or I had this Harold Guskin How to Stop Acting book,
Sure.
and I was reading that. And then when my manager Gigi would come by, I would
Close
hit
that
shift
screen.
whatever and
Yeah.
close the screen and have both of my terminals up and running. And I did that for about half the year of 2009 before a friend of mine, Brooks Brantley, who's he's a family member of mine now. Brooks suggested that I go to a conservatory. And so kind of in secret, he came to my house and my parents' house where I was staying, and he helped me with a monologue. I auditioned for this New York Conservatory for the Dramatic Arts, got in, told my parents that I was like, I'm going to leave JP Morgan behind and I'm going to become an actor. And it seemed like my parents were fully on board. My mom definitely was like, son, do what you love to do. Because she was like, the corporate life, like if you hate this, it's just going to get worse. The more money you make, it becomes harder to then leave.
Yeah.
And especially, she was like, you're 20, I was 23, about to turn 24. She was like, you're young, you don't have kids, you don't have a family, do this. And I thought my dad was on board. He wasn't right away. I found that out later, that my mom, and this is, you know, I love both of my parents for this, but I love my mom kind of telling my dad, like, just let him do this.
Sure.
You know, my dad, in his mind, I think, was like, what the hell is he doing? Like, he's got a secure job. Like, why is he leaving?
Right.
There should be a better plan behind this. But that was kind of the genesis of it. And then I went from conservatory in 2011 to do Pace University, back grad program in 2014, did a summer at Lambda in 2016, and then did the other masters at Lambda in 2019. And now I'm here.
And here we are.
And here we are.
So I knew that you had done finance before. I didn't realize that you were there during 2008.
Yeah, I got hired March 2008. That's when Bear Stearns collapsed.
Yeah.
But it was like, it's Bear Stearns. Everything will be okay. And then the fall of 2008, the winter of 2008 happened.
Yeah.
And then it was like buddies that I graduated from Morehouse with were losing their jobs. Goldman was okay. Like, some of my boys at Goldman were fine. But like everybody else, we were in like dire territory. Yeah. So it was a very anxious, stressful time. And I quickly learned, like, oh, I'm really only here for the money.
Sure.
You know, like, I think Jim Carrey has this quote where he says, I'd rather fail at something I love than fail at something I hate. Or fail at something that doesn't bring me joy.
Right.
And so I was like, I could get fired like every day going into that office. There's a corner that I would turn, and I would have my briefcase, and I would turn the corner, and I wouldn't even fully step towards my the cubicles where I worked with my team. I would just poke my head out. I'd be like, okay, we're all still here. All right. Oh my God. I don't see a box over where desk, but I do remember, I think the moment when I realized, like, I truly have to go was when we had a supervisor. So Gigi was the boss of the team, but then we had like a supervisor and manager.
Sure.
And there was a guy, and this just shows you just heart posture wise why you shouldn't make fun of people. But there was a guy that no one in the office really truly enjoyed. And I remember this supervisor, this manager, made fun of him the day he was fired. Like, the morning we found out, he was just, we were heading down to breakfast the whole time, and he was just, and I kept my mouth shut because I felt bad for the guy. I was like, the guy just lost his job. But this supervisor was just making fun of him and joking. And then we got up from breakfast, and I remember Gigi was like, hey, can I see you in the office? And we were all teasing the guy. We're like, oh, yeah, go to the office. And as we're setting everything up, as we're eating our breakfast, he comes back. He doesn't say a word. He's got a box. He's putting his stuff in a box. And we're like, bro, what are you doing? Like, you messing around? Like, we were just joking about this. And he's like, no, I'm fired. And that sudden, the suddenness of it, I was like, oh, I gotta get out.
Yeah.
You know, and I've never gone back.
And you did.
And I did get out.
You did get out, and you have found success here in the theatrical world in New York, in the theatrical city. Like, you are making a go of it.
yeah, it's funny, man. It's like I feel like that just started to happen last year,
Sure.
you know. And so what is that? 2009 to 2022. It is 11 years, you know. Like no, 13 years, 13 years before I booked something that changed kind of the trajectory of my career,
Yeah.
which was I booked Much Ado About Nothing last year at Denver Center.
Yeah.
And I mean, all the fear that was there leading up to that point, because I had my first pilot season in January of 2022, and I had been wanting that since May of 2011, you know? And so you go that long and then you're finally there, and I think you can put so much pressure, and I definitely did. I put so much pressure on myself. And even though I knew logically and even emotionally where it was like, okay, every audition I can't have the mindset that I have to book this thing.
Right. It's unsustainable.
But I did. You know, it's just like but it was there.
Sure.
Like every audition became something where it's like I had to book, I had to be perfect. Because if I didn't book and if I wasn't perfect or if I wasn't getting called back in or callbacks or put on hold, then my manager's going to drop me. I won't get an agent. I'll lose everything that I've been working for the last 13 years, you know? And that was so much pressure to put on myself. And I was teaching at the New York Film Academy at the same time. And so, and sleeping on my mom's couch, my mom and dad's couch in Jersey. So it was just, what a wild time, what a wild year. And to book the job in, I think, June, because it was before Helena got married. So June of 2022, like, it was 6 months of just,
wow.
It was a lot.
It
was a lot, and it was definitely a learning curve for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, respect to you for sticking to it that long. I mean, that's years and years of, you know, any actors listening will know that that's just kind of what it is. It's just years and years of never knowing, never having a guarantee. I think that's one of the things that other creatives even or people who aren't involved in the arts at all don't realize is that when you look at people who are on shows, who are working, it seems like there was an inevitability to it. Like these people were always going to have this job, get these work. But when you're going through the audition process and the trying to find agents and the trying to meet the casting directors, there's never a guarantee.
Right.
Like until it happens, it might never happen, which is a terrifying thought when you're sleeping on someone's couch and working and trying to make every audition perfect.
It is, you know, and I remember one of the breakthrough moments for me emotionally happened when I read this book, Station 11. And in the book, and they turned it into a show on HBO. I haven't seen the show, but in the book follows an acting troupe. Like the world's kind of in this post-apocalyptic world, and there's a Shakespeare kind of acting troupe. And
this is a show also.
Yeah, they made it. Yeah,
okay.
They turned it into a show. And I finished the book, and I had to, like, I remember praying one night, and I had to ask myself, I was like, would I still do this, find a way to do this, if the world had ended, if, you know, like, would I be one of these people who just goes from town to town and acts? And I was like, yeah, I would. This is my purpose. And so that shift of I have to be successful, defined by the industry standards of success.
Yeah.
And even like the dream standard of success. Because the dream of like, oh, I want to be in movies and I want to be, for me, it was, I want to be Denzel Washington in Glory / Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible when I was a kid. You know, I was like, oh, I want to be able to do that. And then you realize like there are people who are making a really good living, have families, go on vacation, put their kids through school, who are not series regulars on television or Broadway stars or film stars. You know, that like the working blue collar aspect of acting, which I think is so prevalent in London, because there isn't really that kind of star system in London.
Right.
like that, I was like, oh, okay, this is possible. I can get married. I can have kids. I can travel. My kids can go to school. I can have a middle class life
Right.
and be an artist. And that realization coupled with the fact that I feel like, all right, I'm really in purpose. And am I in purpose only when I'm getting paid to do the thing? And that was a resounding no. And so the moment I feel like I let go of I need to be perfect in every audition, the moment I stepped in, and I'm still learning that. That's something that I still have to battle, because I think the desire to be successful, and really I think the perfectionism that comes from me being a kid and wanting to break every single doubt that I think was placed on me. Like I grew up in a pretty racist community and went to a pretty racist high school. Wow. Where all I heard was, you're not good enough. Even before I got to the high school, people who look like you go to trade schools. They don't go to private high schools. Wow. You should just pick up a trade. You know, you play the violin. No black people play the violin. You should the constant negativity. And even with all the encouragement from my parents, that had a lasting impact, I think, on me, where I was like, I was always fighting against lies that weren't true about who I am and what I could achieve. And so needing to let that go, I had a coach named Victor who I still work with, who kind of had a nice powwow with me at the end of last year, where he said, he was like, every take you do, you think needs to be perfect. And to hear that from someone else, and I was like, say more, go on, what do you mean? And he was like, you're showing your work because you want people to see how hard you've worked. And I was like, and that just hit me.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, yeah, man, I want people to see how hard I work. And then I opened up and I was vulnerable and I was like, here's what I've been through, man. Like, this is the amount of racism that I've dealt with and the amount of trauma that I feel like I've dealt with. And yeah, I need people to know how hard I've worked. And he's like, the moment you do, though, we see you care more about showing the work and less about being connected with another person. And that's where all the magic is. That's where you come alive. And he was like, you got to find a way to reconcile that. And so this year, doing R&J and working with Mad Company, working with Hannah again, like doing this play coping mechanism, the process that I now have is so inclusive of surrender and allowing my concentration to truly just be on, especially when whether it's an audition or whether I'm in a scene with somebody, that it's like God, me, my scene partner in the space. Everything else, everything else has to go.
Yeah.
The moment I start concentrating on anything else other than that is the moment I go back into that cycle of like, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect. Sure. I got to be word perfect. Every scene has got to be, fire and whatever else, all the false encouragement that I think an artist can tell himself or herself, themselves, instead of just truly being connected with another person. So that was, now we're on coping mechanism.
Yeah.
That was really, like, coping mechanism for me changed how I work, changed how I even approach the industry. Like, there was so I'll talk. I want to go back. I want to go through like how coping mechanism came to be.
Yeah, let's
right?
give a little context. For listeners.
Context.
So you, congratulations, you just closed on your Off-Broadway debut.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, with this play called Coping Mechanism that played at the Wild Project in the Lower East Side. Playwright named Cyrus Aaron, who I believe is getting some notoriety sort of in the biz. He's made a few things now that have gotten a little bit of attention.
Brother's talented.
Which is really exciting. This show I saw it I didn't realize, but the opening preview, I thought it was opening night, but it was opening preview.
Yes.
Tight little four-hand cast. You play, in addition to a smaller sort of bit character, you play the ex-husband of the main character, maybe, or maybe the
ex-boyfriend.
Ex-boyfriend
The ex-boyfriend of the main character.
Of the main
Deborah.
character. I believe a year earlier, there was I don't remember the timeline of the tragedy, but yeah.
Right. So I play a character named James, who James is the ex-boyfriend of Deborah. They lose their son to gang violence a year earlier. The play takes place in 2019. So in 2018, their son Nathan is killed by a gang waiting for a bus at a bus stop right outside of his school. And so the play deals with gang violence, it deals with trauma, it deals with how two parents who have mostly been estranged, and James was not in Nathaniel or Nate's life for the majority of his life. How do they deal with the loss of their son? And also, how does Lindsay is Deborah's best friend. How are they all dealing? How are they all coping with this tragedy? And so that's what the play is about. And I played James. I couldn't look at him as the antagonist of the play, but now that I'm not playing the character, I would say he was probably, from the outside, he's probably the antagonist of the show.
Sure.
Because he's what he wants more than anything is redemption and forgiveness. But then how he goes about it, like any, I think, very well-written, Cyrus did such an incredible job, like any well-written character, the thing that they really, really, really want gets pushed further away the way in which they go about trying to achieve it or attain it. And so James, how he goes about trying to get forgiveness is to get Deborah to go to the graduation for his son. They're doing a graduation. His class, Nathan's class, the class of 2019, because they're graduating in 2019, they're going to hold a special honor. They're going to honor him in some special way during the graduation. They want the two parents, Deborah and James, to accept the diploma on their son's behalf while dressed up and give a speech, something like that. And Deborah, from the very onset of the play, is absolutely hell no. And James is, but this is going to honor my son, and I need to do this. But how he goes about it is very, very argumentative and combative with Deborah. And it isn't until the end of the play where he realizes that in order to get through to Deborah, he needs to take accountability and apologize and atone, really, for not being there for his son.
Yeah, there were several beautiful moments where this character really either, I mean, I don't know how you decided to play, but either as a tactic or as a genuine moment of mea culpa, has some really beautiful, vulnerable moments where James is confessing to Deborah about himself, about how he feels, about how he sees the world, in a way that, at least it reads like, he probably hasn't talked like that to anyone ever. I mean, this is a proud black man who's also a cop. Like, these are not generally
right. Who's from the streets of Chicago?
Yeah.
So the armor is, I mean, it's thick. The armor is real thick.
Did you, in finding a way into this character, not just to play these vulnerable moments, but also to put on this character who is so self-protecting? Was it difficult to find one or both of those aspects to put them together so that you can have a character who is so reserved and yet has these moments of release?
Yeah, it was really difficult in the beginning of rehearsal because we didn't have a long rehearsal period.
Yeah.
I was like sobbing throughout this whole play. Like, I wasn't getting through scenes without shedding tears, without being so emotionally rocked by this tragedy. And I talked to Trey about it. Tremaine Harris is the director. I talked to Trey about it. I talked to even my coach. I had a phone conversation with him. I was like, man, I can't even get through. I'm supposed to play the character who's got it all together until the end of the play where he breaks.
Right.
And right now, I'm broken from the beginning of the play. Like, what do I do? And I got some really good advice about that, which was you need the brokenness there in order to then learn how to cover. Because we as human beings, all of our triggers are inside of us. Mm-hmm. The mask that we present to the world becomes the armor, becomes how we hide behind how we really feel. And so I needed to be honest and truthful about how I really felt, and then add the layer of the posture of the police officer. Like I was looking at cops, like, I mean, they're all over the place in the New York City subway, but just how they stood, and the width and the kind of like groundedness of their posture. I found a couple of guys, especially big ones, that I wanted to steal from. And then I really wanted James to have a lot of weight. Mm-hmm. And so in my rehearsals at home, I would strap on my backpack, like instead of having it on my back, I would put it on the front, stuff it with a bunch of books, hold, a blanket, hold more things. I would just walk around with weight, mm-hmm. and like walk around like that, and maybe for like as long as I could until I couldn't hold it anymore. Go through certain scenes, go through certain dialogue with that, and then let it all go and see the effect on my body. And I felt like just a posture kind of came out of that. And I started bringing that into rehearsal. And then the moment we got the belt and the moment I got the holster for mm-hmm. the gun that they got was a fake gun, but had a lifelike kind of a real weight to it.
Oh, wow. Sure.
And so the weight on my right hip and having the badge around my neck and just all of that work really started to help with the armor that James puts mm-hmm. on. And then the need, kind of going back to what you said, like this idea of pride and having made it out of the streets and having this job as a police officer and knowing that, I mean, this is and I think Cyrus hit the nail on the head with this. Depending on where you are in the city, being black and being a cop is seen as a traitor. Mm-hmm. And that was echoed throughout the play, especially by Lindsay, who Deshawn played so well. Like that's echoed throughout the whole play that, oh, you're black and a cop, like pretty much you turned on your own people.
Right.
But for James, this was the way out. And that's kind of, I had to build my own kind of backstory with that. Why did James become a cop? Mm-hmm. But like, this was his way out. This was the way that he could provide. They had a kid at 16 and his son dies at 16. So they're 32, about to be 33 years. They're like 32, 33 in the play. And so to see the job as a way to provide something stable, pension, all of these things, wanting to clean up the streets in which he grew up, all of that adds armor and weight that ended up being very helpful. And I feel like by the last week of tech, really like maybe the last few days of tech, I was able to start really pulling that armor together,
Yeah. Because this was a really tight schedule. You had, what was it, 3 or 4 weeks of rehearsal and then a month of shows like that?
I mean, it was 2 weeks of rehearsal, a week and a half, I think, of tech.
Wow.
A couple of days of previews, and then 3 weeks of a show.
2 weeks of rehearsal before moving into tech.
Yeah. And we had 2 days of table work. So it moved so fast.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Ngozi, who's doing the Refuge plays right now. Mm-hmm. And she was talking about her process, and she said, fast and deep. It has to be, you got to be, you go fast and deep. And so I kind of had that echoing throughout this process, where it was like, okay, the time that I have is the time that I have. Mm-hmm. But how can I go as deep as I can? And then really, and this is where I think my process started to alter, because it had to alter. This idea of trying to be perfect really had to go out the window, and this desire to still play, even though we were in previews, the desire to still play and find things, even when we were in a show.
Of course. Yeah.
You know, me allowing, not on purpose because I didn't want to mess with lighting cues or anything like that, but
Right.
allowing something new to happen, a discovery to be made. That's where the show really became fun, and it reminded me of my time with Hannah and y'all doing R&J, reminded me of working with Rodney that first time when we did it's not War, I mean it is War of the Roses,
Right.
but
Margaret
he
of
has
Anjou,
Margaret of
yeah.
Anjou, you know, with that, for me, the breakthrough of that and some of the notes that Rodney gave me right before we left Lambda, you know, where he was like, man, you're so alive when you're truly in the moment. He's like, but there are times where I sense there's your third eye looking down on yourself, judging yourself. And I was like, damn, how long am I gonna get this note, man? Like, I done got this note I've gotten this note from other acting
Right.
teachers. I go to London, I get this note.
It follows
I
you.
come back here, the acting coach I start working with for this on-camera class, it sort of gives me this note, and it's like, okay, this is really a psychological thing, not an acting thing. What am I going to do so this no longer affects me as an artist?
Absolutely.
Because trying to get everything right is the death of creativity, you know, and when you're no longer creating, especially live and connecting with people, this can feel, especially when there are expectations on you and there's a tight schedule, it can start feeling painful and not joyful.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. On a slightly more technical note,
Yeah.
you were talking about wanting to give James this weight, so you physically strap on items. Either with this role or just in general, when you start approaching a role, do you have a fairly consistent method? Are you a Chekhov guy, a Laban guy? I mean, these are all things we learned at Lambda. Like,
Yeah.
what has stayed with you, and what do you bring into your practice, your regular approach to a character?
Yeah, I think Chekhov takes precedent.
Sure.
Because that's what I think Vince was our movement teacher, right? Like, Vince was my boy. So, like, being, like real talk, like, just being able to talk to Vince after, I would always run up to Vince in the hallway. I would go up to Vince after class ended. I was like, yo, like, how do you do this? Or how do I apply this to text? Or how do I apply this to an objective or to a scene where I want the character to reach a certain place? And he would just talk to me. And so the Chekhov approach definitely, and all the psychological gestures, that definitely became my bread and butter, and still is, I think, my bread and butter with how I physicalize actions. Laban, I want to use more of that. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much that we learned. We learned so much theory, and right before we were about to start applying all of it on our feet, the pandemic hit.
COVID.
You know, and then we were online. And so, I mean, you got the Christopher Yates book. Like, I've gotten various iterations of Laban when it comes to Yat Malgrim and Christopher Yates, the acting side of it, not the dancing side of it. Books. I remember I got this, I believe this woman's book who teaches at, I think she taught at Drama Center. Drama Center is no longer, around, but she either taught at Drama Center, or I think she teaches at Central. But I got her book. I still have the book. I keep renewing it. I think I've renewed it 8 times at the library, thinking that I'm going to have all this time to read it.
This will be the one, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where actually the weight, that's where holding a bunch of weight, there's an exercise in that book where to physically experience weight, weight, space, time, flow, like strong weight, she has an exercise where the students are holding a bunch of heavy items and walking around, and then you let those items go and see how that affects your body. And so that was a Laban approach. And now my process, what I do now, especially because I would say the last 2 weeks of the show, I had a ton of auditions, which was amazing because I had no time to be distracted by the lack of time.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, oh, it's just got to get done.
Right.
And so my process has now become one where I layer a lot of things in, and however that kind of hits me in my spirit creatively, whether it's Laban, whether it's Chekhov, that I'll take the tool out of the toolbox that this 13-year-old toolbox that I have. I will take a tool out of that box, on instinct.
This is
and
what
trust,
it feels like it's called
right,
for,
and
sure.
trust my instincts with what I'm reading. And now I'm very much, I think because of the class I've been in for the last couple of years, I'm very big on theme. What is the theme of the piece, and how do we as artists, as actors, how do we embody that theme physically, emotionally, every objective in every single scene? How do we do that? And so for me, that's now where I start. I'll read a play and I'm like, okay, what is the theme of coping mechanism, or what is the premise?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was everyone's coping mechanism is broken, and the only way it's healed is through vulnerability. Something around there.
Sure.
And then I'm like, okay, James, what's my service to that theme? And I'm like, well, my coping mechanism is broken and I refuse to be vulnerable. So James literally,
so I'm incapable of
there's
this
an
change,
there's it isn't until he's vulnerable at the end of the play that he starts getting healed.
Mm-hmm.
But he still makes a choice at the end of the play to not show up to the graduation, which he's been wanting since the beginning of the play. And so that's how I feel like I could be of service. And then every other, the when, where, what, all those acting questions that
Right.
we're told to ask. I used to just sit down and write them all by hand, and would get very analytical and would
Sure.
be in my head.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, what's this given circumstance? Bet, okay, my son has been murdered. I don't have a child, and I definitely made a promise to myself because my nephew is 16 and black and lives in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'm not gonna go there.
Yeah.
So I need to find another avenue. So what if, I think I had to really just use my imagination and say, okay, what if I had my own son?
Right. Just play with it.
What if I had a son, and what would that be like? And then that's when the Chekhov tools would come out. That's when, I started playing with like, where do I feel shame for having not been able to be there to protect my son? And this is where the Chekhov work comes in. It's like, what's that color? Oh, it's yellow. It's kind of, and with already the weight that I had as James, it's like, it's yellow or gold, and it's kind of in between my traps, or it's like in the center of my back. And if I breathe into that space,
Mm-hmm.
how do I connect with that? And then when I did, I'm like, all this emotion comes, and I'm like, okay, there it is. That's where I'm relating to this circumstance. So then I would go through a scene just focusing on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd be like, okay, how do I feel about Deborah? Well, we hate each other.
Yeah.
And we love each other. So where's the hate coming up? Where's the love coming up? And I just started layering things in one at a time, because I think I have a tendency to want to rush in and play.
Sure.
And then my mind and how it works will try to focus on a bunch of fragments, and nothing's actually penetrating down into the work. And so my process has changed now, where I'm like, let me focus on one layer, not worry about anything else, because I can put my attention or my concentration on one thing, and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And then let me let that go, move on to another layer, and hope that it stays.
Right. See what is inherited from that.
Right. And that, man, like that became, and it sounds, as I'm saying it, I'm like, this is that's basic. That feels like acting 101, but there's something about the years of training, getting all of it, and then remembering at the end of the day, no one can see behind the curtain.
Right.
Nobody's paying $30-something if you see in an Off-Broadway show, or, more money to sit and watch you be like, look at all the tools I've learned,
Right.
I've gained over the years. You feel me? So it's like that became something where I was like, yeah, Gerrard, no one can see the work. And the faith that it takes to say, I put this layer in, I hope it's there.
Right.
And I got to trust that Trey, the director, will let me know that it's, and that took a lot of trust. Like, there are times where I didn't get notes at all.
Yeah.
And I would look at Trey and there's this thing, I remember talking to Deshaun about this, who played Lindsay, where it's like, because of, I feel like the trauma you get in some acting classes, I was like, I must be messing up. There must be something I'm doing wrong.
Right.
I was always approaching it from the negative, and it wasn't until I had that conversation with her, and I had another buddy of mine who came to see the show during previews. He was like, "Why do you think you're bad? Why is your foundation or your neutral place that you must not be doing something
it's
good
bad,
or right?"
It's bad unless someone tells me it's not bad.
Right.
Yeah.
The light bulb that went off for me during the show was that the audience and the outcome of this whole show has got nothing to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in my hands. Some nights we would get a standing ovation. Other nights, crickets. Like claps. People would clap.
Sure.
No standing ovation. Other nights, people sobbing at the end of the play. People laughing throughout the whole play. Other nights, no laughs. No nothing. Show finishes. You get off stage. No one's coming up to you. Nobody's saying anything. And it really, I'm so glad I learned that here. You know, because it's a 4-person cast. I felt like with the big ensemble of R&J or even at Denver Center, Much Ado About Nothing like that, I was one of like 8 people, 9.
Right.
I don't even know how many there were of us in Much Ado, but like they're going to go up to the lead of the show. And I'm not even the lead of Coping Mechanism, but if it's just 4 people, you know if people are coming up or staying or what. And so to literally get to the point where you're like, the audience and the outcome is not my job. The effort and the surrender is my job. And that became so freeing. And now that's in every audition I do, that's in everything that I want to work on. I have to keep reminding myself that the outcome has got nothing to do with me. And then that can allow me to really play. Because I had a lot of, I mean, like, if I'm just being transparent, like, I had a lot of anxiety the first few previews, the first week of the show.
Sure.
Because I remember my manager saying, "Hey, do you want me to bring people out to this?" And I was like, "Yes, bring people out. People need to see the show." And she just asked me a question that I think any rep would ask, which is like, "How's your work in the show?" And I was like,
"Oh God."
Exactly. Where I was like, it's good. I think it's good. And she was like, "Okay, because I'll bring producers
people
or whatever."
will see it,
And I invited some, and we had some talkbacks for a Broadway producer came to see the show, and I was like, and then I just the imposter syndrome, the fear that like, oh man, what if they see it and I have an off night? What if I'll never work again? What if you know, like just all that negativity, and really having to get to that point where that light bulb went off of being like, yeah, why do I start with the foundation that I'm not good?
Right.
Where's that coming from? Maybe I should bring this up in therapy. You know, like, and how do I never step out on stage? Because I would step out on stage those first few previews and the first few shows, and I would feel fine. And right before I come out as David, the conservative, conservative talk show host person, news anchor, I would hear just the negative. I would hear the negative thoughts right before I would be in the curtain. I would be fine, giving everybody a high five backstage, showing all the love to Kara and Maeve, who were backstage working with us, and you know, hug the cast and tell everyone have a great show and feel really powered up and ready to go. And then right before I step out, the negative thoughts. And then I would have to like concentrate on and immediately put my concentration on Deshawn, who's got that first scene with me.
Right.
And I'm actually looking out into the audience as David, put my focus on how I'm impacting them. I would have to do all this extra work to kind of silence the negative feedback. And it wasn't until a week later where that light bulb went off, where I was like, oh, okay. The audience is not my job. How they respond to this is not my job. And the outcome of the show in general,
Right.
who shows up, what casting director is going to come, what all of that. I was like, I invited people. My rep is inviting people. None of it is in my hands anymore.
You can only control what you can control.
Right. 100%.
Yeah. That's I mean, I think that's just another way that arts and specifically theater is just so much like sports. it's a team effort. You
Yup.
can only control what your job is. If you do it well and everyone else does it well, you win. You have a great night. The magic happens. If you start focusing on things that are beyond your control and worrying about other people's jobs, be it the director, the lighting designer, the other actors, then you're not going to be able to do what you need to do to bring the team forward, to bring the group forward.
Mm-hmm.
In a 2/3-week rehearsal process, that's a lot of discipline and a lot of trust that you have to bring both to yourself and your work, but also to everyone around you.
Yeah, it is, and I think the fact that we were Helene, who cast the show, we all loved each other, man. Like, there was so much love in this cast. And Eric, who played my son, like, he's 23, 24. He was looking up to us with so much joy and so much life, so much energy, and so excited to be a part of the production. And to pray before opening night, to pray on closing night, to just the love and the community and the connection that we all had, it was pretty instantaneous during the rehearsal process, which was so necessary. And thankfully, Jess and I come from, I've known Jess because she went to PACE. She went to Actor Studio Drama School. And so she came in 2017 when I was graduating. And so we have a shorthand. We can kind of speak the same language.
Absolutely.
And, she would say, right. And so there was a comfortability already there on that front. And then Deshawn, I've met working on a web series, and I've known her for kind of just through other people for quite some time. So it was just, and then like I said, Eric was just so happy to be there and Trey is this incredible director who has this ability to really allow his actors to collaborate, really feel like they have input, and he still shapes the show.
Right. Like,
we didn't even realize, it's just like subtle ninja kind of, like, you don't even realize it's happening until you're like, oh yeah, there's some shape to this. And so for Trey to be able to do that while I think I shared this with you after the night that you came, but the mirror moment was an idea that I just brought into rehearsal. I didn't ask if I could do it beforehand. I think I might have said, oh, I want to try something. And Trey was like, go for it. And I remember doing it, which is, for the people listening, in the play, James gets the graduation gown from Deborah to try on. And he tries it on. And for me, during that first rehearsal of doing that on our feet, I had the idea at home when I was working on the monologue, when I was working on that scene. And then I was like, I think I'm just going to see if this works. And to just kind of create the mirror and put it out in the audience, fourth wall. And for me, I made the choice that that's the moment. Deborah's got a line where there's no mistaking that Nate was your son, something like that. And then in that moment, for James to see himself as a fraud, to see himself, to see his son in the mirror looking back at him and realize that he doesn't deserve to wear this gown. James doesn't deserve to wear this gown. And to have that moment, and for Trey to be like, yep, we're going to keep that. And then all of a sudden, a mirror existed. And then Jess and Deshawn used, Jess, who plays Deborah, who's magnificent in the play as well. Like, just everyone else just started using it. And I was like, man.
Wow.
And that's the first time professionally I think I've given myself that freedom. The first time I really felt that freedom was, I think, at Lambda.
Sure.
Where we were working with Rodney, and Rodney's like, we had those private, rehearsals with Rodney where we would go off and work with him. He would always say, bring stuff in. And I was so kind of wounded during PACE, and I had some great teachers at PACE, so I'm not gonna disparage the school.
Right.
And I think because the way of working was so different there, you would bring in a choice and you would get kind of torn down. And there's like, if you get torn down in response to your choice, it becomes that much harder to bring a
To do
choice
it
in the
again.
room again.
Yeah, of course.
And so I think I kind of had that. But when I was working with Rodney at Lambda, and that got even encouraged by Ollie, by Hannah, by Penny as well, by everyone really, where it was like, bring in a choice, and we'll either give you the thumbs up or we'll give you the thumbs down, but we're not going to make you feel bad for bringing in the choice.
Right. It works or it doesn't work, but it's
Right.
not a
And
bad
I
choice.
remember doing something. I was playing King Henry I was playing King Edward IV in that Margaret of Anjou play. I remember I brought something in rehearsal, and Rodney was like, "We're not going to keep that, but thank you for bringing that in. That was really bold." And I just remember thinking like, "Oh, so even though we're not keeping this, I felt affirmed that I could bring in the choice." And that for me was like that was a seed that got planted, that now professionally I'm like, the hell have I been doing? I'm doing this, and this is what I feel like in the acting class that I'm in. And Hannah definitely encouraged this in R&J. Like, and I got the freedom to do that, especially as Benvolio and the dancing and how moonwalking on stage, all this stuff that I was doing came from that seed that has continued to get, watered by Hannah, watered by my coach Victor, watered by my other castmates, and feeling like if something happens, if I discover something, especially if you discover it during a show, don't feel like you got to repeat it. Allow it to show up again. And that, going back to that show at Lambda, I remember in the moment, there's a moment where I wanted Nicole, who played my brother George Clarence, to bow to me, and the Daniel Day-Lewis "There Will Be Blood, I Drink Your Milkshake" gesture. Just, I had the thought in the moment, and my body responded instantaneously to go over to her and do this and put my finger on her shoulder and I remember Nicole looked at me like and bowed. And I remember that moment, and I was like, this is freaking dope.
This is cool.
This is cool.
Yeah.
That, to be able to affect another person in the moment, to have the idea come to you from God, from the universe, from whatever you believe as an artist, for it to come in, for my body to be sensitive and responsive enough to respond to it, and then to come out in action. And the action was written, and this kind of goes back to Chekhov and even the Laban work we've done, which is to like get George to bow to me. There are many different ways you could do that, but in that moment, that action got played out in that way. And then it's like, oh, that was awesome. And we did it the second time we did the show. I purposely was like, if it comes up, it comes up. Even in R&J, there's certain moments where I'm like, when I was on stage with you with that monologue, Benvolio's monologue, or when I'm on the stage with Chris, like there were certain things that came out where I got off stage and Chris was like, yo, what was that? I was like, I don't know. And then it's like, okay, Gerrard, don't try to force it to happen again. Allow it to come up. And to be able to start doing that in a show live, and now to be able to start doing that in auditions consistently, that's where I feel like now my process has evolved.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's, I think, so much of the artistry of what we do as actors is putting yourself in a physical, mental, emotional space where you are able to do anything that comes to you in the moment, but also able to not do those things if you don't want to, if you think it doesn't, maintaining yourself sort of floating in this space of availability for whatever comes, regardless of what's worked in the past, what's not worked in the past, keeping in mind all of the work you've done, your knowledge over what your character wants. I think that's a remarkably tricky thing to do, to a place to sustain yourself over the course of a show. Just takes a lot of work and a lot of training. But can be so rewarding for those moments that do come out of wherever and you are available to them.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard this in acting classes. I would hear this all the time because I went to such a methody school. But like Brando with the glove and On the Waterfront, like the glove drops, and while Elia Kazan is rolling, the camera, and Brando just instinctively picks up the glove from his scene partner. I can't remember her name right now. and how like, oh man, that's such a, you incorporate that in live. And I've always looked at that as like, okay, a happy accident. How do you allow happy accidents to happen? And then how do you allow just, there's this great book by Mike Alfreds, who used to work at Lambda, called Different Every Night, which is my favorite acting book. Is actually, I think, a book for directors, but he talks about that, this idea of like same action, the what is the same, the how is different. And how can the how be different every single time? Even when the how is dope one night and you find something, and all of you on stage find something as a company, as an ensemble, it's like, okay, the next night or the matinee show, whatever it is, how do we allow it to be different? If it's similar, cool, but let's not go for a result.
Yeah.
Or, you know, going back to that light bulb that went off for me, the outcome is not up to me. You know, which I used to freaking strangle and, you know, wrestle the outcome to the ground, because if I could, then everything would be perfect.
Yeah.
You know.
This is what will happen, so I'm going to make it happen.
Exactly.
It's tempting, but that's unfortunately not how it works.
Right.
But Gerrard James, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. I hope y'all listening have enjoyed it as much as I have. Any parting words for our listeners?
As artists, like in this industry, as tough as this industry is, there's kind of like the inner voice that you have, your artistic sensibility, your artistic self, your spirit, that can't be like dissuade or can't get value from the industry. That's what I want to say. Not to get your value from the industry. I think that's what I would.
Absolutely.
That's something to get your value from within, to get confirmation and affirmation from your community and from your friends. That's what I think can sustain you through a 13-year period where you're like doing student films and doing a student film where you're never going to get the footage, or doing a student film where it's the middle of December and you're outside in Central Park on a bench freezing, and it's supposed to be a movie that's black and white and without sound, and you think it's going to be cool, and then it shows up and it's not just black and white and without sound. No one's lit. It's just black. Like everything's dark. You can't see anybody. Yet you spent, 8 hours across 3 days shooting in the freezing cold. Like it will sustain you through all of that if you get your value from something outside of the industry, or even if it's within the industry, your inner circle and people that you trust who can affirm your purpose within this industry. And then it's like, if you're in purpose, success, which changes so much, defined by industry standards, you'll be a bit more on solid ground. And the seasons could change, the weather could change, and you'll still be solid. So
absolutely,
that's what I'll leave everybody with.
That's heavy, important wisdom from Gerrard James. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for listening. I am James Hale. We hope you tune in next time for another episode of One Hale of a Conversation. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about any of the creatives who spoke in this episode, check out their social media links in the episode description.